In the year 1066, England stood at the center of one of the most decisive moments in European history. What appeared to be a single battle between rival kings would ultimately reshape England's culture, language, ruling class, and identity for centuries to come. The Battle of Hastings was not merely a fight for a throne, it was the collision of worlds. At the heart of the conflict was a sudden crisis of succession. King Edward the Confessor of England died in January 1066 after a long reign. He left no direct heir. With no clear successor, the English crown became the most valuable prize in Western Europe. Multiple powerful men claimed they had the rightful claim to rule England, and each was willing to go to war to prove it. The English nobility moved quickly. Harold Godwinson, the most powerful noble in England and Edward's brother-in-law, was crowned king almost immediately. The Witenagemot, England's Council of Nobles, supported Harold, believing him to be the strongest leader capable of defending the kingdom. But Harold's coronation was immediately challenged. Across the English Channel, Duke William of Normandy claimed that Edward had promised him the throne years earlier. William also claimed that Harold himself had sworn an oath supporting William's claim during a visit to Normandy. To William, Harold was not a legitimate king, he was a traitor and an oath breaker. Meanwhile, from the north, another challenger emerged. Harold Hardrada, king of Norway, one of the most feared Viking warriors of his age, also claimed the English throne based on older Scandinavian claims dating back to the Viking Age. England now faced invasion from two directions. King Harold Godwinson found himself in an impossible position. He had to defend his kingdom against multiple enemies, with limited time, limited resources, and an exhausted army. The first invasion came from the north. In September 1066, Harold Hardrada landed in northern England with a massive Viking army, supported by Harold Godwinson's own estranged brother, Tostig. The Norwegians defeated local English forces and appeared unstoppable, but Harold Godwinson responded with extraordinary speed. He marched his army nearly 200 miles from southern England to the north in less than 2 weeks, an astonishing feat for a medieval army. On September 25, 1066, Harold surprised the Vikings at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The battle was brutal and decisive. Harold Hardrada was killed, struck down while fighting fiercely on the battlefield. Tostig also fell. The Viking army was annihilated. Of the hundreds of ships that had brought the Norwegians to England, only a fraction were needed to carry the survivors home. England was saved from a Viking reconquest. But Harold's victory came at a terrible cost. His army was exhausted. Many of his best soldiers were dead or wounded. And worse still, while Harold fought in the north, Duke William of Normandy had been waiting. The winds finally turned in William's favor. In late September 1066, William crossed the English Channel with an invasion force of around 7,000 men, knights, infantry, and archers. His army was professional, disciplined, and hardened by years of warfare on the European continent. William landed unopposed on the southern coast of England and immediately began fortifying his position, burning nearby lands to provoke Harold into battle. When Harold received news of William's landing, he had no choice. Despite exhaustion, despite losses, despite the long march ahead, Harold forced his army south again. He gathered what forces he could and moved rapidly to confront the Norman invaders before they could consolidate their power. On October 14, 1066, the two armies met near the town of Hastings. On a hill later known as Senlac Hill, Harold Godwinson positioned his army at the top of the ridge. His men formed a solid shield, wall, one of the strongest defensive formations in medieval warfare. English soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, shields locked, creating an almost unbreakable barrier. The Norman army assembled below. William arranged his forces into 3 divisions: infantry, archers, and cavalry. His mounted knights were among the finest in Europe, fast, armored, and deadly. William planned to break the English shield wall through repeated attacks. The battle began with Norman archers firing uphill. The arrows had little effect. The English shield wall absorbed the attack, and the high ground gave Harold's men a major advantage. Norman infantry advanced next, but they were driven back with heavy losses. The English line held firm. Then the Norman cavalry charged. Horses thundered up the slope. Knights lowered their lances, but the shield wall did not break. Norman knights were cut down, horses fell, and panic spread through parts of William's army. At one point, a rumor swept the battlefield that Duke William had been killed. Norman forces on the left flank began to retreat. Sensing victory, some English soldiers broke formation and pursued the fleeing Normans downhill. This proved to be a fatal mistake. William was alive. He removed his helmet so his men could see his face and rallied his forces. The retreat had been turned into a tactic. Norman cavalry wheeled around and cut down the pursuing English troops. William repeated this maneuver several times. Throughout the day feigned retreats that lured English fighters away from the safety of the shield wall. Slowly, the English formation weakened. As the battle dragged on, exhaustion set in. The English had no cavalry and very few archers. Once the shield wall began to fragment, they had little flexibility. Late in the afternoon, William adjusted his tactics. Norman archers were ordered to fire arrows high into the air so they would fall behind the English shields. One of these arrows, according to tradition, struck King Harold in the eye. Whether this story is literal or symbolic, what is certain is that Harold was killed during the final phase of the battle. With their king dead, English resistance collapsed. Norman knights surged forward. The shield wall finally broke. The battlefield turned into chaos. By nightfall, Harold Godwinson lay dead, along with much of England's noble class. The Battle of Hastings was over. William of Normandy had won. But victory on the battlefield did not immediately make William king. It took weeks of further campaigning, intimidation, and negotiation before English leaders submitted. On Christmas Day 1066, William was crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey. He became known to history as William the Conqueror. The consequences of Hastings were enormous. England's ruling class was almost entirely replaced. Anglo-Saxon nobles were dispossessed, and Norman lords took their lands. French-speaking elites now ruled England, introducing new laws, customs, and architecture. Castles began to dominate the English landscape. Stone fortresses replaced wooden halls. The Domesday Book was compiled to record lands and wealth with unprecedented detail. The English language itself changed. Old English mixed with Norman French, eventually evolving into Middle English, the foundation of the language spoken today. Culturally, politically, and socially, England was transformed. The Battle of Hastings marked the end of Anglo-Saxon England and the beginning of Norman rule. It connected England more closely to continental Europe and set the stage for centuries of conflict, including the struggles between England and France. 1066 became more than a date. It became a turning point in history. A single battle, fought on a hill in southern England, changed the destiny of a nation forever.